how can failing to align yourself with reality work? How is that possibly going to work? Well, you say, well, I can, if I lie, I get away with something. It's like, no, you don't. I tell you, I swear this is true. In all of my clinical practice, I have never, ever seen anyone ever get away with anything even once. You think the chickens won't come home to roost. It's like, all that means is you're too stupid to see what your lies caused, or too blind or too self-deceptive. You just don't see it. And so you don't get away with anything. Nothing. It's terrifying to actually understand that. It's terrifying. What if you can't get away with anything, ever? Well, that's the judgmental God, fundamentally. And then, of course, you can't get away with anything, because imagine that you took a flexible plastic comb, and you bent it backwards. And you say, well, I got away with that. It's like, well, what's going to happen when you let go? It's going to snap back and hit you in the face. And that's life, man. You warp the structure of reality? You think you are someone who can warp the structure of reality with your words and get away with it? Really? No, man, that should terrify you right to the core of your soul. You're not God. Tell the truth, or at least don't lie. Because you can't tell the truth, right? Because who are you to tell the truth? That's a mighty tall order, man. But you can stop saying things that you know are lies. And that will change your life if you do that.
What would it change your life?
Well, how can you adapt to reality when you falsify it? And you think, well, I'm just lying to other people. No, you're not. You can't just lie to other people, because what you say becomes you, especially if you practice it. Because we build ourselves out of words. And that can be lies in action too. It's like, don't say things you know to be false. That's a good start, man. And it aligns yourself with the truth. And how can that be a bad idea? How could you possibly defend the idea that you could warp the structure of reality and get away with it? I mean, who, like I said, who do you think you are? Reality is, you don't mess with it. It kills you, and it'll torture you quite a lot before doing that if you're particularly unlucky. So beware. They say the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. That's that judgmental God. It's like, you violate your conscience, man, you will pay. That's hell. Do you want the horror of failure or the certainty of failure? The horror of potential failure or the certainty of failure? Because if you don't do this, you will fail. Now, it'll be put off, but it will absolutely happen. And so that fear, I understand why that stops people. It's no joke to be rejected. And it's going to happen while you practice. And it's a real fear. But you're deluding yourself by thinking that there's a no fear option. There's just a delayed fear option, right? Because if you don't get this right, well, you're going to fail for sure. And then you're going to be miserable and vindictive and bitter and anxiety ridden. And you're going to cause trouble for yourself, and you're going to take it out on women and other men. And that's an ugly path, man. And so I see why you're afraid, but you should be way more afraid of that. And that's a nice way to help people get their thinking straight about fear. It's like no zero fear path. There is nothing that will make you more powerful than your words. And so if you think that reading and writing is for pansies and dimwits, or teachers' pets, you're seriously misinformed. And so, I talk to people like Jocko Willink, and Jocko's as tough a guy as you could ever hope to encounter about literacy, and a number of other people too who are also seriously tough guys. They all know perfectly well that literacy is a huge part of what's made them unstoppable. And you don't take that lightly. It's really serious, and it's a failing of our education system that that literacy isn't marketed properly to young men. It's like, straighten up. Speak properly. Write. Learn to write. Why? Because that's the same as learning to think. And why should you think? Well, because you won't do as many stupid things and your horizons will widen. And then too, when you need to entice people along your journey, hopefully somewhere good, you'll be able to do it because you'll be compelling. let's say the marketing association between toughness and dangerousness and literacy. There's something wrong about that, we think, some weird way, and that's wrong. It's like, sure, you should be physically tough, and you should be tough in your temperament, as well as having the capacity for play and compassion. You know, that has to be developed too. But that's not enough. And I don't care how tough you are physically, you're nowhere near as tough as you would be if you were physically tough and really literate. And then you're an unstoppable force, and hopefully for good. And that's a much tougher battle than, you know, being tough for your own idiotic, selfish ends. That's just pathetic. And so, get your words together, and then see what you can do. And don't be thinking that that's somehow beneath you. That just means you're stupid, that you think that. You don't know anything, you think that. It's wrong. And you're limiting yourself so much you can't even imagine it. You might not even figure it out till you're 60 and then it's too late. So read, write, think. Why should you read? Well, do you want to be stupid? Do you want to be stupid? What happens when you're stupid? You walk into walls because you don't see them. And if someone comes along who's more educated than you, more literate and cannier, you'll lose, man. You'll lose. And you'll lose too because you can't think properly. So you won't aim at the right things, and you won't be informed by the great individuals of the past. And you need that. We're historical creatures. This isn't optional. It helps you become who you could be. It helps you move out into the world and have your great adventure. And to bring people along. God only knows what you can do if you've got your words lined up properly. And young men would listen to that if someone who knew what they were talking about was telling them that. There's no safe path. There's a noble path. There's an honorable path. There's no safe path. And possibly you wouldn't want that anyways, because, well, who are you exactly, you know? Look at you, you know? Warrior stock. Every single one of your ancestors has stayed alive for 3.5 billion years. It's like, good work, man. That's a lot. And so, what makes you so sure you're built for safety? What makes you so sure that that's what we should strive for? And then if you want adventure, I'll tell you what an adventure is. You tell the truth as nearly as you can, and you'll have the adventure of your life. That's for sure. And that isn't trying to fit in because you're naive or, you know, because you're too afraid to lie. That doesn't make you telling the truth if you're too afraid to lie. That's, you know, in a cowardly sort of way. There's a wise way of being too afraid to lie. It's lies that turn competence into tyranny. So don't lie unless you want to be an incompetent tyrant. And you think that's easier. It's like, in some ways, I suppose, it's easier because you can slide into that. But existentially, it's hell. And hell has this weird quality because it feels like it's eternal. Money has its utility, primarily as a tool for doing things, really. You know, you can think about it as a means for obtaining luxury items, but that gets dull pretty quickly for most people that have any sense. It's like, I've been to the houses of very wealthy people, and some of them are quite remarkable, but most of them, because they're creative people. But most of the time, I remember going to a gated community, for example, in California. It was a huge house. It was probably 10,000 square feet. But it was no different than a 2,000 square foot house. It was just bigger. Like the stoves were bigger, the fridge was bigger, the wine cellar was bigger, the rooms were bigger. Who cares? It's more to take care of. It's not helpful for anything unless you're using it for a creative purpose. And, you know, they also lived in a gated community, and you can hardly imagine anything duller than that. You know, like, there's nothing there. There's no bars. There's no nightlife. There's no nightclubs. There's no corner stores. There's no churches. There's nowhere for people to hang out. There's not even any sidewalks. So who cares? Males who occupy positions of power are much more attractive to women. So there's a famous Canadian psychologist, team of Canadian psychologists, Margot Wilson and Martin Daly, who worked out at Hamilton, at McMaster. Canada's most outstanding evolutionary psychologists did a study at one point showing that, first of all, they established the relationship between inequality and male aggression. The correlation's like 0.8. It's off the charts, man. It's like, it's one of, maybe it might be the most powerful relationship between two hypothetically independent variables that psychologists or social scientists have ever discovered. It's off the charts. So inequality fosters male-on-male violence, and it's because of competition for scarce resources, and it's driven by sexual selection pressures, roughly speaking.
Yes.
One of the things that Daly and Wilson did, and I believe this was in Chicago as well, they did an ethnological, anthropological study of the consequence of interracial murder in the gang setting in Chicago. So basically what would happen is two gangs were vying for territorial dominance, let's say, and there was some kind of violent exchange. So let's call it a fight. Well, the thing is, if you're in one gang and I'm in another, and we engage in a violent altercation, one of us perhaps might die, but who's going to die is a toss-up, right? So that means that I can plead self-defense if I'm involved in that altercation. Well, and so generally what happened was that the plea was self-defense. The charge was plea bargained down to involuntary manslaughter or to manslaughter. The person was thrown in jail or sentenced for perhaps 3 years and served something like 18 months. And then when they re-entered the fray, when they were back on the streets, their credibility had increased substantially, and so had their probability of success. So the left's concern with inequality is a justifiable concern. The problem is we don't know what to do with it. We don't know what to do about it. It's very difficult to shovel money and other resources, because it isn't only money that this sort of process applies to. It's very difficult to shovel resources from the pile at the top down to the many at the bottom who are hovering around zero.
Yeah.
So it's something that has to be taken into account because, well, first, it's not good for everybody to be stacking up at zero, and second, it destabilizes the society itself. So, but that doesn't mean we know what to do about it. That's the critical thing. It also doesn't mean that the reason that the people at the top have most of the resources, regardless of what those resources are, it doesn't mean that the reason they have them is because they're exploiting the people at the bottom. Now, there is an element of exploitation in any complex productive system, always, because they don't operate completely fairly, right? So yeah, suffering is built into the fabric of human existence. And so you are vulnerable and you will die. And you can, that's harsh, that's tragic, I would say. And tragedy is built into being. And so to the degree that you partake in that tragedy, you could consider yourself, although I think it's the wrong way of conceptualizing it, you could consider yourself as a victim among the universality of victimhood. I think that's not a helpful way of looking at it because it leads to despair. But to think of yourself as a particular victim, or to think of yourself as a victim among the privileged, I think that gets dangerous extraordinarily rapidly.